Welcome to Answers News. We're coming to you live from the Creation Museum, and we do this every Monday and Wednesday. We'll have a team of experts up here, although today we've got, I don't know if you can say experts, we got experts. We've got myself, I'm Tim Chafee. I'm the content manager here for the Attractions Division, and here with me is Dr. Danny Faulkner, or Professor Faulkner, and I'll let you introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay, I'm the staff astronomer here. I have my PhD in astronomy. I taught physics and astronomy at the University of South Carolina, Lancaster, for more than a quarter century. 8 years ago, I had an opportunity to retire a little early to come work here at the Creation Museum. And so I've been here since January of 2013.
All right, well, welcome to Answers News. I know you've done a few of these in the past, but not in this kind of setting.
We're up inside of a cramped studio upstairs, so this is much better.
All right, well, those of you that are watching from home, we do have a live audience here. So audience, go ahead and cheer and let yourself be heard. There we go. All right. So as we mentioned before, if you're watching here in the room, please keep your cell phone silent. We are streaming live on Facebook and on YouTube, and I'll be checking that every once in a while to see if we've got people chiming in with some questions, or if you're from really far away, let us know on those channels. We're going to be covering some of the recent news items from a biblical perspective, but before we do, let me make a few announcements. We've got a conference coming up here in just about a week at the Ark Encounter, the Answer Center. This is the Bible and Sexuality, and it's our annual conference for pastors and church leaders. So you can find out more about that at answersforpastors.org. We've got Deaf Day coming up here at the Ark Encounter and at the Creation Museum. We'll have a bunch of people here to do translation, to do signing for those guests who are coming. And it's really a lot of fun to be a part of that. Have you been able to do any of those where you've had people translating for you?
Yeah. It's always a lot of fun. You get distracted watching them sign.
It's interesting how quick they have to, especially with somebody like me.
I once did an outside at night observatory thing with some deaf people, and that was real interesting, because how can you see the signs in the dark? That was tough.
I believe it. That's impressive. So it's great that we're able to have these and communicate to people in that way. We've got our streaming platform, Answers TV. We've got over 2,000 programs on here now. If you haven't checked out Answers TV yet, I'd recommend you do that. You can get a 7-day free trial, and also you can subscribe for an entire year for under $40 and take advantage of a lot of great shows. We've got science programs and nature programs and homeschool, all sorts of other programs we're putting on there, plus a lot of our speakers who give regular talks. Dr. Faulkner, I'm sure, has several presentations on there. I know I've got some on there as well. We've got our Creation College Expo coming up in November, and that is also at the Answer Center down at the Ark Encounter. So you can find out more at creationcollegeexpo.org. All right, well, as people are jumping on here, we usually start with what we call a fluff piece or a fluff article. And I don't know if this one's really that fluffy, but it is kind of funny for us who don't live where this person lived. So a Kulalinga, I don't know if I'm saying that right, or Kulalinja, woman wakes at 2 a.m. to find snake chomping on her forehead. So this is in the Northern Territory of Australia, way up in the tropics, close to the city of Darwin, the biggest city in that territory. And this woman woke up and had a snake attached to her forehead. And
we laugh, but I don't think I'd be laughing if it happened to me.
No, my wife and I would love to go to Australia someday, but we've got friends from there, and they tell us all the time there's snakes everywhere. There's snakes at the door. Then she read this article. I don't think I'm going to ever convince her that we should go.
I've been to Australia. It's not that bad. They don't have kangaroos running everywhere, hopping everywhere either. But still, when you think about it, hear about it, most of the most venomous snakes, insects, spiders around the world, about half of them are in Australia. So
and the biggest crocodiles.
Oh, yeah. I don't know how anybody survived the early days there.
We were joking earlier. I think that's why we have a lot of Aussies working here. They were trying to get out of there. And I like this statement. It's so Australian, I think. She said, I thought this is cool, and it's going to get me some street cred.
That sounds like an Aussie.
Yeah, I don't think that would be my reaction. So anyway,
I don't think that's the snake. I think that was a fake snake that they had there.
Yeah, that was a fake one. Yep.
But it turned out it wasn't venomous, and she was treated, given antibiotics, because it was a nasty bite.
Yeah, but they didn't even kill it. They just threw it outside, and then they saw another one the next day. All right, well, that's not quite how we treat snakes around here usually when we find them, but well, actually we have some at the Ark Encounter at the zoo.
Yeah, I'm always afraid of snakes. They terrify me when I first see them in the woods or in my yard, but I give them a wide berth and let them go because they serve a useful purpose. I have a healthy respect. I don't like them, but I respect them.
Yeah, I don't mind snakes, but spiders I'd rather not, especially the big ones. All right. Well, Danny, this one is more up your alley.
Yeah.
And actually we got a few articles here that are, it's pretty hard to have things over my head because I'm 6'8", but when it comes to astronomy, it is definitely over my head in a lot of ways. So this is the first candidate for an extragalactic planet identified. We have, in the last 20, 25 years or so, there have been a lot of extrasolar planets that have been identified. Usually that's done through, at first it was initially just by checking like the gravitational pull or seeing the star wobble a little bit, but then sometimes you get it where it will pass right in front of the star and you can see it. That's less common. But those have all been within the Milky Way galaxy. Now this one they're talking about being extragalactic. So if you want to share.
Okay, yeah, we've discovered exoplanets, first one about 25 years ago in the early mid-90s. And these are just planets orbiting other stars. And since people began to embrace the heliocentric theory, the idea that the sun is the center of the solar system 400 years ago, they speculated maybe there were other planets orbiting other stars, just like the sun is a star and has planets orbiting it. But that was speculation for much of 4 centuries. But the technology in the 1990s finally advanced to the point that you could start doing this. And at first, most of them were discovered by that small tug on the star. As a planet orbits a star under the gravity of the star, the gravity of the planet pulls back. So the star wobbles a little bit. But in the last 15 years or so, 10 years, the main way is looking at what we call a transit. If you view the system on near its orbital plane, if the star is sitting here, then once each orbit, this planet will pass in front of that star and block out the light. And we've discovered about 4,000 planets that way in our own galaxy. Now this is in M51, the Whirlpool galaxy. It's between 20 and maybe 28 million light years away from us. So it's very far away, much farther than anyone found before.
So we're not going to go there anytime soon.
No. Okay. And it was a system, what's called an X-ray binary star. And by the way, I study close binary stars, eclipsing binary stars. I don't do X-ray binaries, but I know enough about these that it's close to what I do. And what you have in this kind of system is a large star and then what we call a compact object, either a black hole or a neutron star. Neutron star is just a little larger physically than a black hole is. And you have material pulled off from the big star onto it, and when it falls down toward it, it gets heated up and gives off X-rays. And it's hard to produce copious X-rays any other way, so they grab our attention. We want to study these things for a whole host of reasons. And what they found in the data in monitoring this system is that there was a period of time over several hours where something passed in front of this thing and completely blocked off the X-ray emission. And it was a very, very regular sort of thing. It had an eclipse, as it were, and by studying my eclipsing binaries, I know that by the depths and shapes of the eclipses, you can infer some things about the size. And the size turned out to be about 7 times out of Jupiter, about sometimes the size of the Earth, excuse me, about the size of Saturn. And this object is they don't know what the orbital period is. It's rather long, they think. They think at least 10 times the Earth's distance from the sun. They only saw one event. Usually you want to see more than one event, 3 events ideally, so you can get the orbital period locked down. So all they know now is just roughly how big the thing is. And they're going to keep looking at it and see if they can see another event. But kind of happenstance, as it turns out. If this is confirmed, I mean, it could be due to some other process we've not thought of yet. If it's confirmed, it will be the first exoplanet in another galaxy. And that's kind of a neat first. I don't know if it means much otherwise.
So you're not saying there's life on there?
Nobody's going to suggest that. Yeah, with the X-rays you're getting from here, it's going to sterilize that planet. So we're pretty safe in saying there's nothing there. And you brought up a good point. When people are looking for exoplanets, they're wanting to show that planets are common. They're wanting to show that Earth-like planets are common. Hence, life may be common in the universe. And from time to time, probably several times a year, an article comes out about the latest Earth-like planet out there, and usually just a few minutes of searching on the internet, I can give you 3 reasons why this planet is not harboring life. And that's exactly what I would expect. Despite all the press, there hasn't been an Earth-like planet found yet. So I'm confident that we're not going to find any.
Which you go into more detail in our planetarium show as well, the UFOs or the aliens, it's called aliens.
And I give a
Fact or
talk on
fiction.
this from time to time as well, and it's pretty clear, I think, that the Earth is unique in this respect, and good science backs that up, by the way.
Well, and that leads right to our next article here. But before we do, we've got David tuning in from Queensland, Australia. He says, I'm not going to say it with the accent. He says, "I mate from Park Ridge, Queensland," and then he says, "It's all good. You don't bother them; they don't bother you." Talking about the snakes we were talking about a little bit ago.
That's a good attitude to have towards snakes.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so he's probably working for their tourism bureau and trying to bring. So this one says, "A giant planet found around a white dwarf." So, like we were just talking about, but this one's not extragalactical. This
It's much closer to us, a few scores of light years away
like
from us.
80 light years, I think.
Something like that, yeah. So it's nearby. And a white dwarf is a star that's about the size of the Earth, but it can contain the mass of the sun. It's a very dense object. If you brought a teaspoon back to the Earth, it would weigh as much as an automobile might weigh. So these are very dense objects. And they're interesting as well in astrophysical research, but this object has, this white dwarf has a star or a planet orbiting around it, and the orbital period is like 1.4 days, and I was noodling around this morning trying to get the distance. They didn't give the distance. We don't know exactly how far it orbits from the planet, but I figured out it's about 2% of the orbital distance of the Earth from the sun. So we're talking maybe a couple of million miles as opposed to 93 million miles. So this thing is orbiting very close, and it's like a Jovian-type planet, Saturn, Jupiter size. We know a little more about this one because we have more information on it, because it transits much more often than that other one did. The really interesting part about this one, though, is how a white dwarf, we think, astronomers generally think how a white dwarf becomes a white dwarf. We think it's the core of a old star, quote unquote, that's blown off outer layers, leaving behind a white dwarf. It's a red dwarf star, and obviously a red giant star that blows off its outer layers, and that would be kind of a catastrophic event for a planet that close, particularly. In fact, if it were that close, it would have been orbiting around inside the star, not outside the star. So the big question is, how did that planet get there, is the big question. If we look out at space, it would be impossible. Now, we would argue that probably God created this white dwarf on day 4, pretty much as it is, and it's orbiting around. But to the evolutionists, that's not good enough. So they have to concoct some theory about how this planet was really far out, maybe farther out than Saturn is now, and migrated inward. In the last 25 years, there's been a lot of discussion about planetary migration. They're finding these exosolar planets much closer to their parent stars than they ought to be, based upon how they think these planets develop and evolve. So they're going to be working overdrive, I think, trying to explain how you can migrate this planet in this close. I just think it's very interesting. I don't know what quite to make of it yet, but it's a conundrum that the evolutionary worldview has to solve.
And the last section of this article is actually kind of a lengthy section. It was all about how these planets might get into a habitable zone, and then they could become life-bearing worlds, and so that all sorts of evolutionary ideas in there. And they even use the term that they could evolve into life-bearing worlds. So
not likely this one, no.
No, but not, well, none of them.
Yeah.
That's not going to happen naturalistically. Only God creates life. But it's just interesting to me because a lot of times the secularists will say, you guys, evolution refers to biology, it doesn't refer to other things, but they use it in articles all the time to talk about the development or evolution of the planet, those sort of things. They use it far beyond just biology.
And I've had some critics, say, well, you creationists, you're crazy. Evolution, there are no alleles here, no genes, no all this kind of stuff. And all I have to do is refer to a classic textbook I used in graduate school for a couple of classes. It's the title of the book was Stellar Nucleosynthesis and Evolution.
Oh, I read that in third grade.
Right in the title of the textbook, So astronomers use the term evolution all the time. What they mean by that is a naturalistic explanation of how things came to be, which is a pretty broad definition of evolution, I think.
All right, well, our next article, I think you might start to understand why we have Dr. Faulkner up here with us today, because we're going to be doing a little more astronomy. This one is Comets Have Ultraviolet Aurora Too. And I'll let you
Yeah, this one it just kind of it doesn't have much to say about creation, evolution, or age even, but it's an interesting little thing. This is a comet that has been in the news quite a bit lately. They had this attempt to land on the surface with a probe a few years ago. So we've been studying the daylights out of this thing. And this is an ultraviolet image. You can see those kind of wisps coming out of it like this. That's the aurora they're talking about. Now, it's different from a Earth aurora or northern lights. Here you have charged particles from the sun that burst out during a solar storm related to flares. It gets close to the Earth, and the Earth's magnetic field shields, protects the Earth, deflects those particles, but a lot of them then end up spiraling down and coming close to the Earth's surface at the near the magnetic poles at high latitudes. And there, the charged particles are moving very quickly. They can smash into atoms or molecules, 60 miles up. They ionize them. Then when they recombine, that produces the green and blue and a red light that you see of an aurora. This one's a bit different. There's no magnetic field involved. And it's even a different mechanism entirely. We think these are electrons from the sun that are doing this. Electrons exist in the solar wind. We rarely see evidence of those, though. So this is kind of neat to see this for a change. And what we think is happening is those lines emanating outward like this from the comet are believed to be emission of gases, very rarefied gases being shot out. Much of the material inside of a comet is ice that gets sublimes. It goes right from gas to, from a solid to a gas. So it goes out in streams like this. The electrons come streaking along, and they happen to intersect that material coming out in those streaks or rays. They ionize those, but it's a different kind of ionization, different types of elements involved. And so it's not producing a visual aurora that you can see with your eyes. It's in the ultraviolet part of the spectrum. So it's a first, once again. Not a lot of bearing on upon the history or origin of the solar system or comets, but I think just a really cool result. Unanticipated. I didn't see it coming. Nobody else saw it coming either.
And it was a refreshing article because for once they didn't have a section at the end where they said, okay, now let's try to put this into an evolutionary framework, and here's our story, and we're going to push it in.
Millions of years.
Yeah, and they didn't do that with this one. So
You're right, that is refreshing.
Yeah, well, on this one they did. So our next article, these fossils show our brains.
Supposed to leave now, right?
No, I need you up here.
Okay.
There's still some big words.
All right.
All right, these fossils show our brains evolved slower than our society. So what this article did, they're looking at some of the human remains, some of the from anatomically modern humans that they're dating back to about 200 to 300,000 years ago. They're saying, look, our anatomy is kind of set at that point. And so the people at that time had the same size skull that we do for the most part. They should have been just as intelligent as us. How come they weren't building these big cities? How come they didn't have rocket ships? How come they didn't have all the things that we have today? And so they pictured these people as hunter-gatherers, and for 100,000 years or more, and then you're finally developing different things. So one of the good things about this article, it does help us understand that intelligence does not equal technology. That's something that a lot of people are confused about, and we make that point down at the Ark Encounter in our Ancient Man exhibit. The reason we are able to use these things is because we're building on the shoulders of the people who have gone before us. So if somebody had not invented the microchip, for example, we wouldn't be where we're at today technologically. And the same thing's true with the printing press and some of the other things.
Can you imagine a cell phone with a bunch of vacuum tubes in it? Be a huge thing.
that phone that we had in the 80s, the brick phone.
Well, they didn't have vacuum tubes. That thing we have to carry on your shoulder like a boombox or something.
Yep. Now, there's a lot in here that we would agree with as far as what we're finding, but the timeline we completely disagree with. And what you'll notice from, and we make this point a lot, creationists and evolutionists, we have the same data. We study the same things. We just reach different conclusions because of our starting points. And when it comes to history and archaeology, we generally agree going back about 3,500, maybe even 4,000 years. And then as you get closer to the time of the flood, they just get this period that they stretch into hundreds of thousands of years and even millions of years, and that's where things really get distorted. But if you think of from a biblical perspective, a lot of this would make sense, that after the flood, or leading up to the time of the flood, Noah was building the ark really at the peak of his civilization's technological capabilities, probably. And he's able to build the ark. But then all of technology at that point is wiped out, except for what they have on the ark itself. And then they have to kind of rebuild and restart, and they have to find the metals or whatever they're going to do, and then they get together at Babel, just a few generations later. And then another technological reset, and people scatter all over the place. And one of the reasons why we don't find all these technological advances is because a lot of people were, working all day long just to survive. If you're a hunter-gatherer, or if you're doing agriculture, you don't have a lot of you don't have all the machine equipment, the large tractors and everything where you can feed hundreds of people with, a couple of farms, and then that allows other people to study the stars and to do other things like that.
And when this article came out, it brought something to my attention I never thought about before, but it's indeed a conundrum. You have modern humans around for 250,000 years, and the best they can do is small, very primitive, if you will, stone tools, and that's it. And then much more recently, like in the past 50, 60,000 years, suddenly they developed fish hooks and devices for launching spears or darts. They have bows that they use for the first time. So why is it? It's a conundrum from evolutionary standpoint. If you're around for 250,000 years and the best you can do is chip stone, and then all at once, all this new technology suddenly appears, why did it take so long? Why didn't anybody in that length of time come up with these things? And that's a mystery, as the article seems to indicate. They're scratching their heads trying to figure out how did that happen or how did that not happen?
Yeah, from a biblical perspective, we actually think that Adam and Eve, the first two people, they would have been more intelligent than us. Yeah. They didn't have the technology that we do, but again, those are not the same things. Imagine living over 900 years. How much could you learn during that time? And their bodies weren't suffering from thousands of years of the curse and all the effect that has had on our world. And so we believe people were at least the same level of intelligence, probably even smarter at that time. And it's what I explained before. The flood would have wiped out a lot of that. Babel would have caused a reset. And then what we see, a lot of what we hear from the anthropologists and everything, a lot of that's just, from our perspective, just what happens after Babel with these early civilizations starting up in the Fertile Crescent and in other places. So, yeah. All right, next one. This is residential schools cast long shadow on LGBTQ2 community in Northern Ontario. So this is about an evangelical group that ran residential schools and provides counseling programs for Indigenous youth, and people are saying that this is very harmful. This is what they call conversion therapy, and that people who are part of the LGBTQ2 community, I'll explain the two in a moment, that's harmful for them if they're growing up in these Christian homes and they're being told that this is sinful. The way they are is something that's an affront to God, and so we shouldn't do that. We should just accept them. That's really the push of the article, and really does go after Christians in a lot of ways, and really just attacking what Scripture says. The Bible is very clear on these issues. Now, we're not saying that we should be cruel and mistreat people. That's not the point. But real quickly, the two, and then Danny, I'll let you comment. Some of you might not be familiar with what that is. It has to do with a Native American concept or Native peoples concept that it's not just male and female, but in their history, they were saying that they had people who were not really both, but not really either one. There was like a third category, and it doesn't really fit anything that the Western mindset usually has or that we would have. So they just call it two. So that's where that abbreviation comes in. But if you want to add anything to this article.
Well, one thing that strikes me is the fact that we've had a tremendous shift in our culture in the last decade or two. It wasn't that long ago that our culture agreed that we're not afraid to call these things sexual deviancies. Homosexuality that was considered beyond the pale, and society as a whole reflected, if you will, a Christian worldview. I'll put that in air quotes for a reason here. Unfortunately, while they defined that as being deviant and wrong and sinful and wicked, it fostered a lot of maltreatment of people that were into those things, unfortunately, and a lot of hatred for those people. And they were shunned and they were treated very badly. And Christians, I think, went along with that. We just got used to that. That was our culture. And suddenly the culture shifted. And I think Christians, by and large, and Christian institutions have had a difficult time trying to adjust to that. We end up being called homophobic or full of hatred and bigotry. And our approach to these people should be love and firmness, telling them the truth, but at the same time, not ridiculing them, not putting them down, not setting them aside in a special category of sinners. And that's what society did for the longest time. And it's a situation where we Christians didn't inform society. We let society inform us. And when society completely flipped, we were totally unprepared And that's the reason why we have programs like the Pastors Conference coming up next week, is it?
Yeah.
Dealing with these kind of questions. So it's a good opportunity for you to listen and come and learn from some of the things we want to share with people.
Yeah, and what you'll see in our culture is this issue is really being used effectively by the secularists to marginalize Christians. They're very effective at it. So even
doing to us what we used to do to homosexuals and other people.
Yeah, so they say for any organization that works with us that promotes those views, talking about this group, they're not welcome. They're not welcome here to do these things, to run these schools. And they were talking about a Mennonite organization that had been starting schools and doing other things in that area for decades. And then the article was really kind of deceptive, because suddenly it shifts and talks about this Anglican priest who was guilty of abusing over hundreds of people, I think it was, but treating it as if it was the same group.
Yeah, when I read that, I thought, well, wait a minute. How did we get from an evangelical group to a Roman Catholic priest? There's a huge jump there, and it didn't even make a transition at all.
Right. It was kind of just poisoning the well, just throwing everything you can. I mean, if you're talking about evolutionists, it's not like we just suddenly, if you're talking about a professor that maybe you had who might have been coming from an evolutionary perspective, you don't just bring up some of the worst evolutionist offenders in the world and say, well, that's who this person is. Yeah. All right. Well, this one, a little more kind of lighthearted, but also it's crazy. Vox makes ridiculous claim that Beethoven's Fifth Symphony somehow represents elitism and exclusion. So, dun, 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 that one. Somehow that is elitist.
What's elitist about St. Bernard's?
I don't know.
Well, that bombed.
Yeah, so the article goes on and talks about how before Beethoven's time, so with Mozart, you had people who would stand up in the middle of it and kind of shout, like, play it from the beginning. They were real radical, and they would be disruptive. And
like
it was okay,
concert.
it was acceptable at that time.
It's like a rock concert.
Yeah, like play Freebird or something, right? And then when Beethoven came along, it was more of a story, and you had to listen to the whole thing. You had to sit there quietly imagine that. You had to sit there the whole time quietly and listen, and then at the end you could applaud. And so it's elitism, because apparently people who aren't capable of sitting there, who aren't part of the upper class, or of a certain ethnicity, maybe they're implying that's not right. That's elitist, and it's we need to get rid of that. And if you think about what they're really doing here, I mean, they're really stretching to try to figure out anything you can find from the past and try to make it what we call social Marxism. This is the oppressors versus the oppressed, and those who, if you think that you should have order and those kind of things, well, we got to disrupt that. So Beethoven, sorry, you got to be disrupted. And so, yeah, who knew that Beethoven's Fifth was elitist and exclusive? Anything else on this one?
No, that's one of the more bizarre items we've had in a while. I couldn't believe I was reading what I was reading. It's not like satire to me. I kept thinking, is this the Babylon Bee that I'm reading here?
Well, actually, it's written by not the Bee.
I know.
Which is the people who
I kept
started
thinking
the Bee.
that maybe they're pulling a trick on us here, reversing it.
Yeah, I'd recommend going to read that article. It is pretty funny. The critique of it, I love the very end, is hashtag cancel Beethoven. All right, and finally...
Well, at least it's not Wagner.
All right, and finally, this one makes me a little nervous. Giraffes are basically fuzzy lightning rods, new research suggests. So there was a private reserve in South Africa where they had 8 adult giraffes, and they went out one day and they found, this is earlier, February this year, they went out and only could find 6 of them because 2 of them had died. And when they studied it, they realized that one of them had been struck by lightning, and you wanted to say the word. Where was it struck?
Ossicon.
Yeah, in the ossicon.
Little antler thing on the top.
Thing that looked like a horn.
Love that word.
Yeah. So one of them was struck there. The other one was not struck directly by lightning, and they speculated about how it might have died.
Yeah, when people can be killed, or animals can be killed by lightning, even though they're not struck. You have a huge surge of current. It starts with no current, lots of current, then no current at all. And that surge, both coming and going, sets up eddy currents. The magnetic field changes, you get an eddy current. You can have this huge current inside of you, that can stop your heart and other basic functions and never be touched by the lightning bolt. And that's probably what happened to the other one standing nearby. The one got struck and the other one was collateral damage by that eddy current set up inside.
Yeah, they said it could have been through that, or it could have been a side flash, so it hits the one and then jumps over to the other. And
yeah, that can happen too, but you think there'd be like a burn mark or something.
Right. Yep. So I think they were going with the second one. And there was another case in 2016 in Norway where 300 reindeer were killed by a lightning strike because of what you were just describing.
The secondary, the large surge in current.
So Danny was telling me before we went on air that he's never even thought of this before, that lightning could, that would be striking giraffes or something. Well, I can tell you what, as somebody who's really tall, I don't like going outside when there's a thunderstorm.
And contrary to popular belief, giraffes don't live in the rainforest. They live in savanna, where there are acacia trees here and there. But if lightning comes down in that flat area, it's going to strike either an acacia tree or anything else that's tall, and they're as tall as the trees are. So
because it's looking for the quickest path to the ground.
And in retrospect, I told Tim, I said, this is a big duh moment for me. I never thought about giraffes being walking lightning rods, but that's exactly what they are. Sometimes something happens, somebody investigates, wow, and then everybody who reads about it say, well, of course, but nobody saw it coming. And I just have to wonder how many things out there are in the world waiting to be discovered that no one has ever thought about. In retrospect, this makes so much sense. But again, I guarantee you, nobody's thought about it before.
If Danny were 6'8", he would have thought about this a long time ago. It does make me really nervous. I used to live on a hilltop, and we'd have to go across the street to get to the church building. I thought, if it's storming, I'm not running out there. No way. I'm going to be the tallest thing around.
It's so sad because I love giraffes. I don't know if you've tried our zoo out here in Cincinnati. We got a fine zoo here, and they got giraffes. And to me, they're just the most graceful animals. And I've seen them in the savannah in Botswana. Wild ones. I've seen them in parks as well. And I just always attracted them. I love cheetahs, like polar bears, and I love tigers. But I think the most graceful are giraffes. And it just kind of sad. I shed a little tear here because a couple of them died, needlessly so, I would think.
Yeah. And it's another reminder of some of the damage that man's sin has done to this world, because before that, there was no death and suffering. And
Adam and Eve's fault, isn't it?
Yeah, let's blame Grandma and Grandpa. Yeah. All right. Well, we made it through all the articles. Nice job.
Yeah, right on time, too.
Yeah, and right on time. So we want to thank everybody for tuning in who, through Facebook or through YouTube, and everybody in the audience, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for being here in person, not tuning in. And we'll be back on Monday and Wednesday next week at 2 o'clock Eastern. Have a great day. God bless.